unlimited drama series.
The sparks from my welder cast dancing shadows across the workshop walls as I put the finishing touches on Sophie's anniversary gift. 3 months of work, every evening after my day job at the construction site, shaping cold steel into something beautiful. A sculpture of intertwined hearts, polished to mirror brightness. Real craftsmanship, not some mass-produced garbage. I heard her heels clicking across the hardwood floor upstairs. Sophie was home from another late meeting at the gallery, and judging by her unsteady footsteps, she'd already been sampling the wine. Again. "Danny," her voice carried that familiar edge of irritation. "What's that awful smell?" Metal polish and honest sweat, I wanted to say. Instead, I called back, "Just finishing up your gift, honey." She appeared in the doorway, still in her gallery uniform, black dress, pearl necklace, the kind of outfit that screamed, "I'm too good for this neighborhood." Her blonde hair was perfectly styled despite the late hour, and her makeup looked fresh. Funny how she never looked that put together when she came home from actual work. "Danny, it's almost midnight. Some of us have real jobs tomorrow." Real jobs? Right. Because managing a pretentious art gallery was somehow more important than building the houses people actually lived in. I lifted my welding mask and gestured to the sculpture. "Happy anniversary, Sophie. 15 years married, 20 since we met." She unwrapped the cloth covering with the enthusiasm of someone opening a tax bill. Her face went through several expressions: confusion, recognition, then something that looked like physical pain. "Oh, Danny," she sighed, the way you'd sigh at a dog that had peed on the carpet. What am I supposed to do with this? Put it somewhere nice? It's handmade. Took me 3 months. Handmade." She said the word like it tasted bad. "Danny, I work in the art world. I can't have this kind of thing in our house. What would people think?" Before I could answer, she picked up my sculpture. 3 months of careful work, every curve planned and polished, and dropped it in the workshop trash can. The metal rang like a funeral bell. "I don't want handmade junk cluttering up our space." She turned and walked away, heels clicking their judgment with every step. I stood there for a long moment, staring at my work sticking out of the garbage like a broken dream. "Some folks have no taste," I muttered, fishing the sculpture out and dusting it off. The metal was scratched, but not ruined. Like me, I supposed. The next morning, I decided to walk downtown instead of driving to work. Fresh air, clear my head, maybe stop by Ray's gym for coffee before heading to the construction site. Ray Kowalski had been my best friend since high school, back when Sophie was still Sophie Martinez, before she became Sophie Hartwell and decided her husband's blue-collar friends were beneath her. That's when I saw it. My sculpture. My handmade junk. Sitting in the window of Barlow Contemporary Gallery with a price tag that made me stop walking and read it twice. $10,000. I stood on the sidewalk, construction workers flowing around me like water around a stone, staring at my own work behind that pristine glass. The hearts I'd shaped were catching the morning light perfectly, exactly like I'd planned when I was designing it in my head during those long evenings in the workshop. Beautiful piece, isn't it? I turned. Sophie stood beside me, arm in arm with Ethan Morrison, her business associate from the law firm that handled the gallery's contracts. Ethan was everything I wasn't. 6'2", silver-haired, wearing a suit that cost more than I made in a month. The kind of man who'd never had metal shavings under his fingernails or concrete dust in his hair. Very striking, Ethan agreed, his voice carrying that educated smoothness that made everything sound important. "The artist has real talent." Sophie laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a hurricane. "Oh, you should meet him sometime, Ethan. He's very authentic." They walked away, Sophie's heels clicking the same rhythm they'd clicked when she threw my work in the trash 12 hours earlier. I watched them disappear into the coffee shop across the street, Ethan's hand resting on the small of my wife's back with the familiarity of someone who'd done it many times before. $10,000. For handmade junk. Ray's gym occupied the ground floor of a converted warehouse, all exposed brick and industrial fixtures. The kind of place Sophie called aggressively masculine, which Ray took as a compliment. I found him behind the counter, reading yesterday's sports section and drinking coffee from a mug that said, "World's Okayest Boxer." You look like someone stole your lunch money, Ray said, not looking up from his paper. Worse, someone stole my anniversary gift and sold it for 10 grand. Now he looked up. Ray had the kind of face that had stopped a lot of punches in his amateur days. Not pretty, but honest. When he was angry, you knew it. When he was thinking, you could practically hear the gears turning. Come again? I told him about the sculpture, the trash can, the gallery window. Ray listened without interrupting, which was one of his better qualities. Most people felt the need to fill silence with noise. Ray understood that sometimes you needed quiet to think. So, your wife threw away your gift and then sold it behind your back? Looks that way. For 10,000 bucks? That's what the tag said. Ray folded his newspaper with the precision of someone who'd learned to control his temper through years of practice. Danny, I gotta tell you something, and you're not going to like it. I waited. I saw Sophie last night, around 11:30, at Marcello's. Marcello's was the kind of wine bar where they served drinks that cost more than most people's dinner. The kind of place Sophie went for business meetings. She was with that Ethan guy, the lawyer. They worked together, Ray. Gallery business. Yeah, well, they were conducting their business in the alley behind the restaurant. With their tongues. The world got very quiet. Not silent. I could still hear the traffic outside, the hum of the fluorescent lights, someone working a heavy bag in the back room. But quiet in the way that everything becomes distant. When your brain is trying to process information, it doesn't want to accept. You sure? Danny, I've known you since we were 17. You think I'd make something like this up? No, Ray wouldn't. Ray was the kind of friend who'd drive you to the airport at 4 in the morning or help you move a couch up 3 flights of stairs. He was also the kind of friend who'd tell you the truth, even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. I went home to an empty house. Sophie had already left for the gallery, but her presence lingered in the air, expensive perfume and the faint smell of guilt. I started looking for things I'd been too trusting to notice before. The hotel receipt was in her purse, tucked behind her credit cards like she'd forgotten about it. The Riverside Inn 2 nights ago. The same night she'd called to say she was working late on the Morrison account. Morrison. Ethan Morrison. The pieces clicked together with the mechanical precision of my workshop tools. Sophie's late nights. Her sudden interest in expensive clothes. The way she'd started pronouncing certain words differently, like she was trying on a new accent. Her complete dismissal of anything connected to my world, my work, my friends. When she came home that evening, I was waiting in the kitchen with the receipt on the counter. "What's this?" I asked. She glanced at it, and for just a second, her mask slipped. I saw fear flash across her face before the practiced innocence took over. "Oh, that. Ethan had a client dinner there. I just helped coordinate." "At the hotel?" "The restaurant, Danny. They have a very nice restaurant." "Why didn't you mention it?" "Because you get jealous and paranoid about everything." Her voice was getting sharper, more defensive. "Ethan is a professional associate, a mentor. He's helping me advance my career. By taking you to hotel restaurants? You're being ridiculous." But I wasn't being ridiculous, and we both knew it. Sophie was lying with the fluency of someone who'd had practice. The question was how long she'd been practicing and what else she'd been lying about. That night, I followed her. She said she was going to a gallery event downtown, some wine and cheese thing for potential donors. I gave her a 20-minute head start, then drove my pickup truck to the Arts District and parked where I could watch the gallery entrance. Sophie never went inside. Instead, she walked 3 blocks to Marcello's, where Ethan was waiting at a corner table. I watched through the window as they shared a bottle of wine that probably cost more than my monthly truck payment. They sat close together, his hand covering hers on the table, their heads bent in intimate conversation. When they finished dinner, they walked to the alley behind the restaurant. I took out my phone and started recording. The kiss lasted 30 seconds, long enough to be passionate, intimate, familiar, long enough to destroy 15 years of marriage. When they broke apart, Ethan said something that made Sophie laugh, the same wind chime laugh she'd used when she called my work authentic. I stopped recording and walked back to my truck. On the way, I passed Ethan's BMW in the restaurant parking lot. Pristine black paint, leather interior, the kind of car that announced its owner's success to the world. I took my keys out and dragged them along the driver's side, from headlight to taillight. The sound was like fingernails on a chalkboard, but infinitely more satisfying. "Nice paint job, Ethan," I muttered. "Shame about the scratches." I was halfway to my truck when I heard the mechanical whir of a security camera swiveling to track my movement. The next morning brought a knock on my door at 7 a.m. I opened it to find a police officer with tired eyes and a notepad. "Daniel Hartwell? I'm Officer Martinez. We had a report of vandalism at Marcello's restaurant last night. Security camera caught someone matching your description damaging a vehicle in their parking lot." I invited him in for coffee and told him the truth. Well, part of it. I'd been downtown, yes. I'd walked through the parking lot, yes. But I hadn't damaged anyone's car, and I certainly hadn't been carrying keys in a way that might accidentally scratch expensive paint. "The vehicle owner is pressing charges," Officer Martinez said. "That's his right, but he'll have to prove I did something wrong." The officer looked at me for a long moment. He had the expression of someone who'd heard every lie and half-truth in the book, but also the weariness of someone who knew that proof and truth weren't always the same thing. "Mr. Hartwell, if you did damage that car, now would be a good time to admit it. Vandalism charges can be reduced if you're cooperative. Officer, I've been married 15 years, worked construction for 20, never been arrested for anything more serious than a speeding ticket. Does it seem likely I'd suddenly start vandalizing random cars?" He closed his notepad. "We'll be in touch if we need anything else." After he left, I called in sick to work and drove to the seediest part of downtown, where private investigators kept offices above bail bondsmen and check-cashing stores. Glenn Reeves occupied a third-floor walk-up that smelled like cigarettes and disappointment. Glenn was exactly what you'd expect from Central Casting. 50-something, gray stubble, coffee-stained shirt, the kind of face that had seen too much and remembered all of it. His office walls were covered with certificates, newspaper clippings, and photographs of people who probably wished they'd never met him. "Cheating spouse?" he asked before I'd even sat down. "What makes you think that? 20 years in this business, you develop a sense for these things. Plus, you got that look. Like someone kicked your dog and then charged you for the privilege." I told him about Sophie, Ethan, the hotel receipt, the kiss in the alley. Glenn listened without taking notes, occasionally nodding, like he'd heard the same story 1,000 times before. "What do you want to know?" he asked when I finished. "Everything. Everything costs money. How much money do you have?" "Enough." Glenn quoted his rates. They weren't cheap, but they weren't impossible either. I wrote him a check for a week's worth of surveillance. "One thing," Glenn said as I was leaving, "whatever you're planning to do with the information I find, think it through first. Revenge is like a gun. It can blow up in your face if you don't know how to handle it." While Glenn was doing his job, I started doing mine. Not construction work. I'd taken a leave of absence, claiming stress. My real job now was learning everything I could about my wife's secret life. Sophie's laptop was password protected, but she'd never been particularly creative. Her password was Gallery 2019, the year she'd gotten her promotion to assistant manager. Her email was a treasure trove of professional correspondence, personal messages, and increasingly intimate exchanges with Ethan Morrison. The early emails were purely business: contract reviews, client consultations, scheduling meetings. But over the past 6 months, the tone had shifted. Professional courtesy became friendly banter. Friendly banter became flirtation. Flirtation became explicit planning. "Danny's working late again," read one message from 3 weeks ago. "We could have the house to ourselves for a few hours." Ethan's response: "Your husband seems like a nice enough guy. Are you sure about this?" Sophie's reply: "Danny's a good man, but he's not ambitious. He's content to build other people's houses and play with metal in his workshop. I need more than that." I read that exchange 5 times. each reading making me angrier and more determined. Sophie wasn't just cheating. She was dismissing our entire marriage as beneath her aspirations. But the real revelation came in an email from 2 days ago, after Sophie had thrown my sculpture in the trash. The piece sold for exactly what you predicted. Sophie wrote to Ethan, Mrs. Barlow was impressed with my eye for emerging talent. She's considering me for the curator position. Ethan's response, brilliant strategy. Using your husband's work to advance your career shows real initiative. He'll never know. My sculpture hadn't just been thrown away and then rescued. It had been stolen, sold, and used.
It was one time at the company retreat.
Your coworker posted a photo. You're wearing this shirt.
Watch more on Grammarly.com.
To make Sophie look like a talented art scout to her boss. The woman I'd loved for 20 years had turned my anniversary gift into a career advancement tool. I printed every email, organized them chronologically, and put them in a folder labeled Evidence. Then I started planning. Glenn called me 3 days later with a report that exceeded my worst expectations. Your wife's been busy, he said, spreading photographs across his desk like a poker dealer. The affair with Morrison started about 8 months ago. They meet twice a week, always at the Riverside Inn, always room 237. But that's not the interesting part. He showed me a photograph of Sophie and Ethan at what looked like a warehouse. They're running a side business, art forgeries. Morrison has connections with private collectors who aren't too particular about provenance. Your wife identifies pieces in the gallery's storage that won't be missed. Morrison finds buyers, and they split the profits. How much money are we talking about? Based on what I observed, probably $50,000 over the past 6 months. I stared at the photographs. My wife wasn't just an adulteress. She was a criminal, and apparently a successful one. There's more, Glenn continued. They're planning something big for next week, the gallery's annual charity auction. Morrison's arranged for several high-value pieces to be accidentally sold to his private collectors, instead of going to legitimate bidders. How much? $250,000 minimum. I sat back in Glenn's uncomfortable chair and tried to process this information. Sophie had been stealing from her employer, committing fraud, and planning an even bigger crime, all while treating me like an embarrassing relic from her past. What do you want to do with this information? Glenn asked. I want to stop them. That's a job for the police. No, I said. That's a job for me. The Barlow Contemporary Gallery occupied a converted Victorian mansion in the Arts District. Mrs. Eleanor Barlow had inherited the building from her late husband and turned it into one of the city's most prestigious art venues. She was old money, old school, and absolutely ruthless when it came to protecting her reputation. I called her office and scheduled an appointment under a false name, claiming to be a collector interested in donating a significant piece to the charity auction. Mrs. Barlow was exactly what I'd expected. 70 years old, silver hair pulled back, and a perfect chignon, wearing the kind of jewelry that whispered rather than shouted about wealth. Her office was filled with museum-quality pieces and photographs of her, with various celebrities and politicians. Mr. Davidson, she said, using the fake name I'd given her secretary, I understand you're interested in contributing to our auction. Actually, Mrs. Barlow, I'm here about your employee, Sophie Hartwell. Her expression shifted from polite interest to guarded attention. Sophie is one of our most valued team members. I'm sure she is. I'm also sure you'd want to know if she was stealing from you. I spread Glenn's photographs and Sophie's printed emails across Mrs. Barlow's antique desk. She studied them with the methodical attention of someone who'd spent decades evaluating art and people. These are quite serious allegations, Mr. Hartwell. Daniel Hartwell, Sophie's husband. Mrs. Barlow's eyebrows rose slightly. I see. And you're bringing this to me because Sophie and her boyfriend are planning to rob you blind at next week's auction. And because I'm tired of being treated like an idiot. She studied the evidence for another 10 minutes, occasionally asking questions about dates, locations, and sources. Finally, she gathered the papers and photographs into a neat stack. Mr. Hartwell, what do you want from me? I want you to let them try. I beg your pardon? Let them go through with their plan. But instead of calling the police, let me handle it my way. Mrs. Barlow leaned back in her chair, studying me with the same intensity she'd given the evidence. That's a very unusual request. Sophie threw away 15 years of marriage for a man who's using her to commit crimes. She threw away my anniversary gift and then sold it in your window for $10,000. She's stolen from you, lied to you, and planned to rob you. I think unusual circumstances call for unusual solutions. What exactly are you proposing? I told her. Mrs. Barlow listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making notes on a legal pad. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Mr. Hartwell, your plan is elaborate, potentially dangerous, and almost certainly illegal. Yes, ma'am. It's also exactly what Sophie and Mr. Morrison deserve. She smiled for the first time since I'd entered her office. How can I help? The charity auction was held in the gallery's main showroom on a Friday evening in October. The city's cultural elite gathered to bid on art, drink expensive wine, and feel good about supporting local artists. Sophie wore a new black dress that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and Ethan arrived in a fresh suit that couldn't quite hide the scratches I'd put on his car. I watched from across the street as they worked the room, playing their parts perfectly. Sophie, the dedicated gallery professional, Ethan, the sophisticated legal advisor. They moved through the crowd like dancers who'd rehearsed their steps, charming donors, and positioning themselves for the evening's real business. At 9 o'clock, as planned, the lights went out. Mrs. Barlow had arranged for a power grid failure that would last exactly 12 minutes, long enough for Sophie and Ethan to move the high-value pieces they'd targeted, but not long enough for anyone to get suspicious. Emergency lighting kicked in, casting everything in an eerie red glow that made the elegant gathering look like a scene from hell. I entered through the service door, wearing all black and moving with the confidence of someone who belonged there. Sophie and Ethan were already in the storage room, loading paintings into a wheeled cart. Hurry, Sophie whispered. We've got maybe 10 minutes before the power comes back. Relax, Ethan replied. Everything's going according to plan. Not everything, I said, stepping out of the shadows. They spun around like guilty children caught stealing cookies. In the red emergency lighting, their faces looked like Halloween masks, shocked, guilty, terrified. Danny? Sophie's voice cracked. What are you doing here? Stopping you from making the biggest mistake of your life. Ethan recovered first, straightening his shoulders and putting on his lawyer voice. Daniel, I don't know what you think you're doing, but this is private property. You're trespassing. Actually, Mrs. Barlow invited me. Turns out, she doesn't appreciate employees who steal from her. I pulled out my phone and showed them the recording I'd made of their conversation in the alley behind Marcello's. Then I showed them printouts of their emails. Finally, I showed them Glenn's surveillance photographs. You have two choices, I continued. Option 1, I call the police right now, and you both get arrested for theft, fraud, and conspiracy. Option 2, you do exactly what I tell you to do. Sophie found her voice. Danny, you don't understand. This isn't what it looks like. It looks like my wife is stealing art with her boyfriend to fund their affair. What am I misunderstanding? Ethan stepped forward, trying to use his height advantage to intimidate me. Daniel, you're clearly upset, but let's be reasonable. Sophie and I can explain everything. Explain this. I grabbed the nearest painting, a small abstract piece worth about $15,000, and smashed it against the concrete floor. The frame splintered, the canvas tore, and both Sophie and Ethan gasped like I'd murdered someone. Danny, no! Sophie screamed. That's worth more than my anniversary sculpture? The one you threw in the trash and then sold behind my back? I picked up another painting. Stop! Ethan lunged toward me, but I'd spent 20 years doing construction work. I was stronger than I looked, and I'd learned to move quickly around dangerous equipment. I sidestepped his charge and shoved him into the storage shelves. Art supplies scattered across the floor in a cascade of noise. Here's what's going to happen, I said, still holding the second painting. Sophie, you're going to resign from the gallery tonight. You're going to confess everything to Mrs. Barlow, return every piece you've stolen, and pay back every dollar you've made from your little side business. And if I don't, then I destroy everything in this room and tell Mrs. Barlow it was your idea. A final act of spite from a disgruntled employee. Ethan was getting back to his feet, his expensive suit torn and dirty. You can't prove anything. It's your word against ours. Actually, it's my word, plus Glenn Reeves's surveillance reports, plus Mrs. Barlow's security cameras, plus the emails you two were stupid enough to send through the gallery's server. I smiled at him. How's that lawsuit working out for you, by the way? The one about your car getting keyed? His face went white. You admitted it. I admitted nothing. But I'm about to admit something else. I pulled out my keys and dragged them across another painting, leaving a long scratch through what looked like a very expensive landscape. Oops. Sophie was crying now, mascara running down her cheeks like black rain. Danny, please. We can work this out. I made a mistake, but we can fix this. 15 years, Sophie. 15 years I loved you, supported you, built a life with you. And you threw it away for what? Money? Status? A man who's going to abandon you the second things get difficult? That's not true, Ethan said, but his voice lacked conviction. Really? Then why don't you tell her about the other women? Ethan's face went from white to gray. Sophie stopped crying and stared at him. What other women? I pulled out another set of photographs Glenn had taken. Your boyfriend has been cheating on his wife for 3 years. You're just the latest in a series. There's Jennifer from his law firm, Maria from the courthouse, and at least 2 others Glenn identified. Sophie looked at the photographs, then at Ethan, then back at me. For the first time since I'd known her, she was completely speechless. The lights came back on. Time's up, I announced. Mrs. Barlow will be here any minute to check on the storage room. You can face her together, or I can explain why her art is scattered all over the floor. Sophie broke first. What do you want? I want you gone. Both of you. Out of my life, out of this city, out of my universe. Sophie, you can keep the house. I never want to see it again. But you're going to sign divorce papers, give up any claim to my business or my assets, and disappear. And me? Ethan asked. You're going to resign from your law firm, pay back every dollar you've stolen, and hope Mrs. Barlow doesn't decide to press criminal charges. Then you're going to leave town and never come back. You can't make us do any of that. Watch me. I walked to the storage room's fire alarm and pulled it. Sirens wailed throughout the building, and I could hear people shouting in the main gallery. In the confusion, I grabbed Sophie's purse and Ethan's briefcase. Insurance, I explained. Your car keys, credit cards, identification, everything. You'll get them back when you've done what I asked. Mrs. Barlow appeared in the doorway, flanked by 2 security guards. She surveyed the scene. Scattered art supplies, damaged paintings, 2 well-dressed criminals, and 1 very satisfied construction worker. Is there a problem here? She asked. No problem, I replied. Sophie was just telling me about her resignation. Sophie looked at Ethan, at the evidence scattered around the room, at the security guards blocking the exit. Then she looked at me. I resign, she whispered, louder. I resign from Barlow Contemporary Gallery, effective immediately. Mrs. Barlow nodded. I accept your resignation. Security will escort you from the building. As the guards led Sophie and Ethan away, Mrs. Barlow turned to me. Satisfied, Mr. Hartwell? Getting there. But I wasn't finished yet. I followed them to the parking garage beneath the gallery, where Ethan's BMW sat under the fluorescent lights like a wounded animal. The scratches I'd put on it the week before had been repaired, the paint gleaming with showroom perfection. Shame about your car, I called out. Ethan spun around. What? I was holding a tire iron I'd taken from my truck. I said, shame about your car. Danny, don't! Sophie stepped between us. Enough. Enough? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Sophie, I haven't even started. I walked around the BMW, dragging the tire iron along the paint. The sound echoed through the parking garage like a metal scream. Then I smashed the headlights, the taillights, and all 4 windows. You're insane, Ethan shouted. No, I'm thorough. I opened the hood and poured a bottle of soda into the engine. Then I slashed all 4 tires and spray-painted thief across the windshield. Sue me, I told Ethan. Take me to court. Explain to a judge why you were in that parking garage in the first place. Sophie was sobbing again, but this time it sounded different. Not like sadness or fear, but like the sound someone makes when they finally understand how badly they've miscalculated. Danny, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. No, you're not. You're sorry you got caught. There's a difference. I walked back to my truck, leaving them standing next to the ruins of Ethan's car. As I drove away, I could see them in my rearview mirror. Two people who thought they were smarter than everyone else, discovering they'd been played by a construction worker with a high school education. 3 days later, Sophie signed the divorce papers. Ethan resigned from his law firm and left town. Mrs. Barlow decided not to press charges, but word spread through the city's art community about what had happened. Sophie's reputation was destroyed, her career finished. I bought a small house across town and set up a new workshop in the basement. The sculpture I'd made for our anniversary sits on my mantle now, catching the light from the window and reminding me that some things are worth more than money. Ray stopped by last week with beer and pizza. "You know," he said, studying the sculpture, "that's actually pretty good work. Thanks. You ever think about selling your stuff? I mean, legitimately?" I considered it. Maybe, but not through galleries. "Smart man." Ray raised his beer bottle. "Here's to new beginnings. And to people getting exactly what they deserve." We drank to that.